And welcome once again to Ewtn's Bookmark. Our special guest author, Carrie Gress, the author of End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. Published by Regnery Press, available naturally through the Ewtn Religious Catalog. EWTNRC.com for all things Catholic. Oh, it's great to see you again.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So this is the end of woman, not the end of women.
Right.
What's the difference and why is it woman?
Well, I think partially because what we're talking about with what we've seen with feminism is it's kind of this effort to destroy the archetype of womanhood. So it's not a matter of killing off individual women, but the idea of woman itself. So that's why we went with woman
and kind of defining what a woman is, right?
Right,
Which
exactly.
is a hot topic.
Very big.
In the beginning, you have a quote from Jordan Peterson: "What you most want to find will be found where you least want to look." Why did you put that quote in there?
Well, partially because I think that so many women have really bought deeply into feminism, and I think that feminism is probably not the answer for most of us. In fact, I can say that pretty emphatically now, having written this book. But where women really will find what will fulfill them and will bring them happiness is being a wife and mother, and those are the things that we've been told we need to shun by the feminist movement. So it was really just the idea of getting behind, getting people to think like maybe I should start looking in other places for that which will really fulfill me.
Right. Hester Vaughan Hester Vaughan. Who's she?
So Hester Vaughan was this woman she was an English woman that she came to the United States, and she was lured here by a man that said he was going to marry her, and so she shows up, and he's already married, and she gets a job as a scullery maid or something. She ends up being raped by her boss and becomes pregnant and is thrown out. Anyway, she delivers her child in the middle of a blizzard in New York City in this attic with no windows. And the baby dies, and actually when she was found, the baby was frozen to the floorboards of the attic, and she was then charged with infanticide. So I really told her story at the very beginning of the book because I thought it was important for us to be mindful of just how incredibly difficult women's lives have been and could be and still can be. But I think that, just that kind of
and how vulnerable,
urgency.
you
Yes,
make that
absolutely.
point, they were.
Yeah,
and that
vulnerable.
many of the strives for the women's, quote-unquote, women's movement, women for equality and these kinds of protections were perfectly justifiable.
Yeah, no, exactly. So that's what was driving people.
You also talk about the fact that in that vulnerability, that in looking at this, they view motherhood making women vulnerable, which it does in some ways because of that.
Sure.
You say feminists have embarked upon a twofold approach. The first step is to help women become more like men, independent and unconstrained by nature. The second is to end the patriarchy. Okay, what is a patriarchy?
All right, so the patriarchy is really just this old biblical idea of using the gifts that men have, but also recognizing an authority that men have, partially because of those gifts, but because this is the way God has instilled it. But what feminism has done is really turn this on its head, and actually the first usage of it in a negative way came from Engels, of all people.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So the idea of getting rid of the patriarchy started before that without using the language, but how do we collapse society down into something more egalitarian? And this is, of course, fruits of the French Revolution and whatnot. So that was really the goal, and I think that's one of the, we hear this all the time now, to smash the patriarchy in so many different ways in our own day, but it's
kind of like a bogeyman that's used, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and even you have Kate Millett here, the domination, oppression, the most pervasive ideology of our time, interior colonization, theoretical imperialism. And then you make the point, you say, well, what happens when the patriarchy disappears?
Yeah.
Has it disappeared? Is that what we're experiencing, or what?
Well, I think what we're experiencing is sort of this strange schizophrenia where feminists want to be like men because again, feminism asks the question, how do we make women like men, not how do we help women as women within this context
is a strange
of vulnerability.
Question.
Yeah.
Why isn't it the one about how do we make women better women, or women be able to succeed rather than becoming like men?
Well, I think that's a great question. And part of the answer is because we've really idolized the masculine because it's powerful. It wins,
so it's about
earns
power
money.
in a lot of these
It's
ways,
absolutely about power and control.
Right.
It's also, free love is very much a part of the whole movement, and it's that desire to, by the feminist movement, to let women be behave sexually the way that men have, seemingly. So I think that that's another layer of it. So yeah, it's this weird schizophrenia, though, where women want to be like men, but at the same time they're telling men to become like women,
right.
And creating all of this incredible tension, for everybody, really.
Right, where everybody's trying to figure out what roles, what am I supposed to be doing, how am I supposed to be acting.
Right.
You talk about the people behind feminism, the idea that tragic and difficult lives many times when you look into it, especially with often tortured relationships with men. So out of that, you would assume that that is impacted their perspective as it relates to the relationship between men and women in general.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the whole first section of this book is called The Lost Girls, and almost to a one, these women have had some kind of abuse. They've had terrible parents. They had awful relationships with men. It's those kinds of things that I think really can skew our vision. We know this happens in our brokenness. It's very hard to see things clearly, and so their solution has been not how do we repair these relationships and help women again, but how do we change? How do we break down these taboos that they think are causing the problem instead of being a solution to it? So it's always a move to liberalize things instead of a move to see that maybe the 10 Commandments and things like that could be helpful.
Well, as you point out, in the 70s, women rated their overall life satisfaction higher than men did, but now on top of everything, women are not happy.
Yeah, no, and that's, I think, a real motivation to pay attention to this this kind of data. I know that's what's driven me, is that we're not seeing happier women. You would think that if feminism was actually doing something good, that women's happiness metrics would show that, but all the metrics show that women are through depression, suicide,
more medicated,
substance
you say.
Yeah, we're taking a lot more medications and not seeing a lot of other rewards and balances.
Did you come up with burogamy?
I did not. Yeah, I did not.
I never heard of that expression, but it makes perfect sense. And you even go back to the old Obama administration, Julia image.
Yeah, remember Julia?
The replacement of basically the husband by the state.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the idea, is that poor women are by and large married to the state instead of to men, and that's marriage has become kind of a status symbol for them because it's something just totally unachievable based on how and the direction in which the culture has been going.
Right, and of course it's time for honest women to recognize that feminism has not been the boon for women that it has been presented, though it presented many advances, as we alluded to earlier. Women were told that abortion is consequence-free, that hookup culture, casual sex are normal, and hormonal therapies for birth control or puberty blockers have no side effects. You go on to say feminism has likewise been awful for men, but it has been particularly awful for children, especially children of unmarried parents.
Yeah. No, I think that the problem is we know that families and we know children do best when there's mother and father. And this is clearly not happening. You also have, these horrible statistics about live-in boyfriends and things like that in terms of the sexual abuse.
Yeah, well, so many times when you hear about abuse in families, it turns out it's not a related.
Right.
It's a stepfather or a live-in boyfriend or something like that going on. Right. You say this book is not about arguing that we should go back to, the 1780s, the 1880s, even the 1950s. Then what are you arguing for?
Well, I think that what I'm arguing for is to get beyond, to reject feminism itself as an ideology, and I don't think that we have to go back to those places. I mean, this is one of the cudgels that invariably we're told we can't be anything other than feminist because we would be going back to something oppressive or awful. But I think society and culture have changed significantly, and it would be incredibly hard to go back to those things. So I think what we have to do is look at who we are using human nature, but also and move forward within that by rejecting what feminism is presenting to us as normal and healthy and happy making.
I thought this was, you said I didn't know what I was going to find when I started researching things, and I thought this was an interesting, you said I thought feminism had been co-opted at some point, but what you really found is it's been this way ultimately from its early beginnings.
Almost from the very beginning, yeah, exactly. And that was shocking to me. I mean, I think over and over again we hear, especially among conservatives, that there really was this major break in the 1960s, and the Marxists took it over, and yes, all that's true, but there were serious problems from the very beginning.
Right. You say feminism's failure at root is its misdiagnosis of what ails women. What do they think the problem is? What do you think the actual problem is?
They think the problem is fertility in children and men. So anything that pulls away from this notion of an independent woman is the problem in their vision. And I think, obviously, that's not the problem. I think the problem is striving towards that ideal of independent womanhood, which we know
Right.
is really a myth.
Now, you say the book is divided into 4 parts. You kind of mentioned the first part. Part 1 explores the early development of feminism into its contemporary iteration. I mean, it goes back to like 1780s or something.
Yeah.
You're talking about here,
Yeah.
way past what
Very
most of us
early.
would think of. Were you surprised it went back that far?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I had no idea that the earliest seeds were there, and then of course, you know, as I get into later in the book, just the connection with Mary Wollstonecraft, and then her son-in-law, whom she never met. He married her daughter, the daughter Mary Godwin Shelley, of Mary Wollstonecraft, who she's wrote Frankenstein, of course.
Right.
Just the what came out of that immediate family. In terms of the feminist movement and what kind of the seeds of it
Right.
was really fascinating.
Out of the
to me.
dysfunction of the
Absolute
family and the
dysfunction.
relationships with
Yeah.
her husband, and then
Yeah.
Lord Byron, in which you go into,
Yeah.
etc. It seems like they created their own Frankenstein in another way.
Yeah. I think you're right.
That we're dealing with. And in part 2, you move on to the way feminism became identifying narrative for Western women. How did that happen?
Well, much of it was because it sort of joined in arms with Marxism, and you know, part of it was the incredible manipulative work of Betty Friedan in her book *The Feminine Mystique*,
Right.
where she hid the fact that she was a communist.
Right, that was interesting.
Yeah.
That she had been involved with organizing and things like
for
that. And
years,
she
yeah.
acted like she had no background at all.
Right,
She just
just a
came to this
housewife.
on her own, right?
Yeah,
right.
exactly. And that's really where you see the kind of manipulation that she's using. She's using tactics like, you know, this victim mentality of, you know, the women that are locked in their, what she calls the comfortable concentration camps. So she's very powerful in reaching sort of the feminine mind and making women believe that they really were oppressed by these things that, you know, are largely part of the Marxist agenda.
In part 3 explains how the women's movement led directly to gay rights and now trans movements. How did one lead to the other?
Yeah. Well, the first step was really just to make men, you know, like the Marxists, that the Marxists initially were focused on class, and those landowners were oppressing the proletariats, the poor.
Right.
So what feminism did was to shift that, and it made men the oppressors and women are the victims. Well, then you have the LGBT movement that sees that's great opportunity in. It was actually just the L and the B at that point, but
Right.
or I'm sorry, the L and the G. But they see this incredible opportunity of making themselves victims, and so heterosexual people then become the oppressors and homophobic and whatnot.
Yeah,
so,
a little bit copying the civil rights movement and stuff
exactly.
like that out of
It's
the
this
60s.
exact same pattern.
That's why
and
they
so
call it human rights. Everything was about
Right.
human rights. Right?
Yep, exactly. So it was just piggybacking on all of that and using the exact same sort of categories that, of course, have led us to critical theory and critical race theory and what we're seeing in the woke culture now.
Right, and in part 4 identifies the broader ramifications of feminism. You say the book examines several philosophical threads that comprise many of the ideologies discussed here. An ideology often starts with the idea of one philosopher and then becomes like a brand. So is feminism an ideology now?
Oh, I think it's been an ideology from almost the beginning. So,
Okay.
no, absolutely. It was definitely a set of ideas that I think we can sort of pinpoint and see how they've been echoed or recycled over and over and over again, you know, from the 1790s up to even the Barbie movie. It's a kind of the same pattern.
Right. You also talk about, and one of the things that you discovered and you looked into dealing with, you know, Katie Stanton and those people, the feminists of that time, and the spiritualism connection that was there. Were you surprised by that?
Oh, I was absolutely surprised by it. I had no idea that there was sort of this connection to the occult and to mediums and seances and all of that with the Seneca Falls Convention, and then later on in Elizabeth Cady Stanton's work, I mean, she's very clearly anti-Christian. She was raised a Calvinist and rejected her faith, and then what she was really trying to do was undermine Christianity. She wrote this book called The Woman's Bible, and you know, and it has all these ideas about how do we reread Genesis in this, you know, very occultish kind of way.
It was a book that was written historically so men could dominate women, basically, kind of.
Right. So
that's
wants,
what she was going against. She said that's what the Bible was.
Right. So she rewrites it, of course, and you know, Eve is given an opportunity. I mean, here she's taking ideas again from Percy Shelley, things that he had developed, you know, 60, 50 years prior. And how do we see Eve as given this opportunity by Satan instead of it being somehow, you know, a temptation.
Right,
fall.
and in her life, her own struggle against parental authority now became a struggle to please that authority. She knew how desperately he wanted a son.
Yeah, so her father and
that was with her father.
And
right?
because her oldest brother had actually passed away, and
Right.
so there was this desire to see her sort of fill his shoes that she felt obligated to do and to prove herself, and so she kept rubbing up against things that were limiting that, and that was really source of one of the sources of her.
They say here, among the spiritualist church, so-called, the Methodist writer noted that women are the high priests in the scriptural teachings in regard to the relation of men and women, and their duties are reversed.
Yeah,
so it
fascinating.
kind of fit into that, again, power.
Power, and we don't need priests or ministers. We don't need men when you've got the spiritualism, because it's the women who are largely doing the seances and orchestrating everything, and men are not necessary at all.
Right, and the next thing you've got Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophy. The Bible, according to the Theosophy, was not a design text, but a historic one that propped up men's oppression to women, and that's where the Women's Bible comes in as well. You say, like Shelley before, Stanton doesn't debunk the Christian myth of the fall, she creates a new counter myth.
Yeah, exactly. So they had to go back to the very beginning and sort of rewrite things so that it could follow what they wanted, what they were presenting in the movement.
Right. Why did you relate Betty Friedan to the caveman lawyer character from Saturday Night Live?
Oh, goodness.
What was the connection in your
Very
mind?
obscure. Well, part of this book, I wanted it to be readable, and I wanted people to be able to see things in their real life that sort of applied to it instead of it being overly academic. But yeah, so there's this skit called Caveman Lawyer back in, I think it was in the 80s. And he would show up in this suit and explain how he had been thawed from, this crevasse that he had been frozen in for 100,000 years or something insane like that. But he would be in a suit, and he would be able to win every argument that he made in court. He was a trial lawyer because everybody loved his story and found it so compelling. And surely a caveman thawed from the frosty tundra would not tell a lie. So I kind of likened that Betty Friedan to that, because she's presenting herself as this sort of very innocent housewife that didn't really even think about women's issues until the 1950s, and of course there's so much evidence that she was clearly thinking about communist issues, and we can see that in her work. It's very apparent. There's references to it in the feminist
and very Alinsky-like in the way she dealt with many of those things.
Exactly.
You say main point here, and this is in the section on Betty Friedan, echoing Marx and Engels' model of motherhood, was that women would only truly be free when they entered the paid workforce, which is also why in the Soviet Union they made abortion legal. It wasn't to free women, it was free women up to stay at work at the factory. You say in 1975, the more strident Simone de Beauvoir, in an interview with Friedan, took this argument to a step further, said, no woman should be authorized to stay at home and raise her children. Society should be different. Women should not have that choice, precisely because if there is such a choice, too many women will make that one.
Yeah. Too many will want to stay home.
So now we've got to force people to do things they don't want to do for their good, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
but this is, again, Friedan's genius, because she found ways to make women want to do it, because she made it attractive. She made it feel like, again, home is a comfortable concentration camp, and the workplace is really where you're free and you're making money, and and all of the media went along with this at the same time. I mean, television is sort of this new thing. You've got these very attractive women. They're all dressed beautifully. They're very articulate. And so this is, I think it's fascinating to look at just all of these dynamics, how they work together to present this model and make the home
Well,
this
do you
awful
think
place.
also those people are living that lifestyle in such a way, and they need the justification for these things because those other issues, home, family, these kinds of things, abortion, are things that impact them. And we're learning, a lot now from the glory days of Hollywood of how many famous female stars had abortions forced upon them, including Marilyn Monroe multiple times. Because you can't get pregnant. We can't allow that. You talk about Kate Millett and kind of our own cultural revolution going on here by destroying the American patriarchy. How do we destroy the American patriarchy? By destroying the American family. Yeah.
No, that was the key. I mean, this is at the heart, really, of the movement for so long, was that goal of how do we get rid of the family? How do we break that taboo? How do we restructure society completely into our own imagining?
And Millett was very intelligent.
Yeah. Oh, she's brilliant.
But
yeah.
but she ended up.
Yeah. Well, she's also mentally
a lot
ill.
Of issues, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Her sister Mallory Millett has been doing a great job of
Right.
telling the real story behind Kate Millett. But yeah, she was mentally ill, and you know, large portion of her work is really focused on this idea of mental illness and what do we do with them and whatnot. But yeah, she absolutely was driven and motivated by this breaking taboos and
Right.
you know, just destroying society on so many different levels.
Say Millett offered the academic justification for feminism and became the backbone of women's studies programs nationally.
Yeah.
We're living with those now.
Yep.
That was featured on Time magazine's cover. Millett was a huge advocate for abortion on demand. Her vision of equality and her view having an abortion became something of a badge of honor long before women today made the same argument. Abortion was the primary way to equalize women in her mind.
Yeah, and she made the case that, you know, men, this was during the Vietnam War, men were in Vietnam were shooting innocent people, so
Right.
women had to be just as strong and kill their own children, was something that she actually argued for as a positive thing. But yet she saw, again, the fertility is the real issue. Children are the real problem that needs to be solved.
You also, I think you find this in different people's stories, but in an effort to free themselves from men, Millett and others put lesbianism on a high pedestal. And one of the main goals of many of the second wave feminists was to erase gender differences altogether. So that's what we're seeing, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, it all started then. It was one of their stated goals, and it just never end. I mean, this is why we're seeing in the trans movement sort of this infighting with feminists, because there's feminists who are like, wait a minute, I thought this was supposed to be about promoting women, and the other feminists are saying, no, this is about whoever feels like a woman, kind of, you know. So there's, it's the ideology sort of battling itself, because both are threads within the movement.
Right, as you mentioned, she was in and out of mental institutions. You say lost girls make more lost girls. What do you mean?
Yeah. Well, I think broken people break other people. I mean, we can see that in our lives, and this is the beauty of confession and you know, what the church offers us. But we see this very clearly in the movement. You were just referring to, you know, Marilyn Monroe and all the brokenness that happens there. But those kinds of celebrities influence other celebrities and influence, you know, the regular woman on the street, and it just leads to just this ripple effect of the domino effect of thinking, you know, these awful things that are being promoted are in fact okay and will be helpful.
Now, was Gloria Steinem, or is she a mean girl?
Oh, I think she's a mean girl. Yeah, I think Gloria sort of kicks off the mean girl movement with respect to the fact that was so savvy and so skilled at being able to sway people and make her own arguments, and she's still doing it. I mean, she's still busy.
Sitting on the Phil Donahue show, right?
Yeah, remember?
Or something.
Right.
Oh, I remember.
Right.
Yeah, but,
yeah.
yeah, she said, without abortion, women's future will be over. Women are much more risk-averse than men, so tapping into the fear of bodily harm or vulnerability is highly effective.
Yeah, right. Make women independent. Yeah.
Don't take my rights away. I need these rights. I need these protections.
I gotta be like a man. Right. Don't make me vulnerable, which is a scary thing, but it's amazing how effective it has been and how the left has used it so well.
Right. She was another person who had some interesting relationships with her father, as I recall.
Yeah.
Steinem.
Yeah, absolutely. And her mother, who was mentally ill, also a theosophist. She had been a practicing theosophist.
Well, you mentioned Wiccan and stuff, and that kind of New Agey stuff in there as well.
Yep.
And this having to do with abortion. A feminist activist in Mexico just confessed that we inflated the figures of a number of women who were dying from botched abortions in order to decriminalize it. We said it was 100,000 when that was the total who had died, period.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that number, I mean, we know, remember Bernard Nathanson confessed to doing the same thing. Exactly.
Well, they do it today, where they come up with numbers and statistics, and there's no background except somebody goes back and finds out somebody made it up one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you talk about the tribe. The success of feminism can be seen in a women's general fear of appearing to be out of step with other women. Yeah. Is there a lot of social pressure?
Oh, absolutely.
Like that?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. You can see, I mean, this is what's behind the idea of all the young girls that are transitioning. You know, back in the day, it was anorexia. You know, there's sort of, we can see these patterns where young girls sort of feel like, oh, this is what the cool girls are doing. And, you know, previously, girls, you know, it's like all the girls are going to the bathroom at the same time. You know, it's just sort of these patterns of how we operate and relate to one another. And so you can see that feminism has used to its advantage that kind of pull and that kind of sense of we have to be like other women. I mean, fashion
a little bit
is
of a
another.
groupthink.
Yeah, I mean,
being independently part of the group.
Yeah. So I think fashion is probably the best example of that in terms of what we're wearing
just
and
before we end, in the section Chapter 8, Patriarchy Smashing. Today, the mantra has changed slightly. Not only are we as good as men, we are in fact better at being men than they are. So many commercials and ads directed at women confirm this. Poor men, they wouldn't be able to do anything without us. Clean up a mess, make a meal, purchase a new car. Now, if the guy's gay, he might be okay.
Adept, yeah.
But if he's normal or somehow comes across as a Christian, he's probably really an axe murderer.
Probably.
At least in the story.
Yeah.
We saw that Gloria Steinem and others zeroed on women's emotions and heartstrings, often short-circuiting reason or logic. They play on women's natural empathy, right?
Oh, absolutely. Empathy, and you know, the Barbie movie I think is a great example because there's some tender moments in that Barbie movie. So that's how they get us to be engaged in something, but kind of working around this, our reason through those.
Right, and there's so much more. And you got Margaret Sanger, other things in here. We just don't have time. There's a lot of information in this book. How long did it take you to write it?
From start to finish, probably about 4 or 5 months. I kind of had some of it in mind already, but yeah, it was a
when
pretty
you
quick
write,
turnaround.
you've got
we just
like
squeezed in.
5 kids,
I have an amazing husband. He actually took over dinner for me while I was writing it, and I don't think I've taken it back yet. But in any event, we squeezed it
Do you have another book in the works? Or?
I don't.
No?
Yeah, just busy with this one, and we'll see. But I'm kind of booked out for a while.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure having you here. The End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us by Carrie Gress. Highly recommended. Check it out through our EWTN religious catalog, EWTNRC.com. I'm Doug Keck. Join us next time right here on Bookmark. Thanks.